This episode brought to you by Ice Barrel. Dave at Power Monkey Camp, I walk outside to see a line of these barrels across the wall, and you guys in there freezing cold. What was going on?
Oh man, bringing Ice Barrel on as a sponsor for this camp was something I've been looking forward to for a while. We used to use cold therapy as part of our recovery process when we were living at the Olympic Training Center for years. It was something that I think we've always been missing from camp, and to be able to have this therapy so readily accessible for the campers and for the staff changed the game. It's something that I think we'll be having with the team moving forward. Did you give it a chance to try it out?
Absolutely. Jumping in there, it brought back some very fond memories of sitting in a cold bath with that I cooled down with just ice. I used to go get ice at the store and throw it in the tub and sit there for a while. But this ice barrel made a huge difference. Just a place that's completely designated for that. Single use, much better than kind of the tub that we had there at Power Monkey Camp before, where there is a bunch of us sitting in the same tub. So I really enjoy the aspect of being able to be in there by yourself. It's perfectly fitted for someone of average to big size to fit in there comfortably and get the job done.
Absolutely. So for those of you who are new to Ice Barrel, it's a cold therapy training tool that offers an easy way to bring ice baths to your routine. With a lightweight design and functional features, Ice Barrel is portable, durable, compact, and looks great. It's something I highly recommend. You can use the code POWERMONKEY, all caps, for $75 off. You can go to icebarrel.com and check out more information. Highly recommended if you're looking to incorporate some cold therapy into your training. Check out icebarrel.com. Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Chad Vaughn, and on today's episode, we have a return guest, Mr. Kelly Starrett. Kelly is obviously one of the most amazing resources out there when it comes to anything PT related. He is also the owner of the Ready State, which has incredible resources at your fingertips as well. We talk about some different things today. We already had Kelly on once, but our episodes go by in a blink of an eye whenever we have Kelly on. It really feels like the hour just flies by. He's such an engaging speaker. He has so much knowledge. He has so many different things that he can speak about on a very high level. Talk a little bit about what it's like to be a dad now of some teenagers that are getting into some higher level training themselves. Talk about Kelly's background with some athletics and what it was like when he was on the national team as a kayaker and some of the things that he learned being an athlete and how that translates into what he's doing today. Some different perspectives, always a wealth of knowledge. We love speaking with Kelly. We hope you enjoy this one.
I would say that there's surely at some point going to be a CrossFit Hall of Fame, and Kelly, you'll be my first vote for that for sure.
Oh, that's true. That's true. There hasn't been, they haven't started that one up yet, but that's an inevitable. The first class.
I can think of like 1,000 people who deserve to be there in front of me, it really is interesting to sort of gather the troops and say, like, who are the people who've sort of created some, real gravity. I wonder, Chad, too, I think you as an athlete is really impressive. And you too, Dave. I mean, you guys were super impressive, but what you've done afterwards with your athletic history really is the reason I think that you guys are both worthy for being in Hall of Fame, is that you've continued to just give back to the sport and make something actually really real of the sport, which is amazing.
No, thank you. And to be honest with you, like me and Chad talk about this all the time, but we normally we didn't have this avenue to be able to teach prior to CrossFit. In gymnastics, really the three avenues that you have to kind of continue in the sport are go coach a collegiate team or a club team, go do stunts, which is what my partner Shane does. He's a stunt man, or go to the circus and, go to Cirque du Soleil or become a performer. And that's how you stay involved with the sport. CrossFit has allowed adults to become relevant within the sport and complete a whole new niche in how we kind of teach people. Same with weightlifting. Like, Chad, what would you be doing if CrossFit didn't give you an avenue to be able to teach people weightlifting?
Drugs.
I really have no, yeah, probably. Yeah, really have no idea. I mean,
you're already 5 years in working at Home Depot from the Olympic Committee,
I
right?
know. I just held on to that. I don't know.
But I mean, we can extend that. Juliet and I were both professional whitewater paddlers on the national team. We started a gym because it felt like we were on a team again.
Right.
So same reason where we could just be. It felt like all the newbie gains. It felt like all of the super technical conversations that we were having every day as a matter of training, we're suddenly just expanded to our friends and family. I'm with you. It's a remarkable happening where, you know, suddenly we can sort of take this quantum leap forward. And it's important because, or to sort of recognize that, I think, because we're seeing right now, again, a lot of confusion on the interwebs about who's an expert, you know, what is good training, you know, how do we, is this, you know, I think we've just traditionally discovered it as athleisure, as like the clothes you wear, athleisure. But now I'm like, that describes a whole side of fitness. And we used to call it fitnessing. We could call it, you know, industrial fitness, you know, but it's fitness as entertainment. And I think that's very confusing to people because it's not getting us actually in the direction of being durable and more skilled.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And you seem to have spent some time considering this. Do you have a way now to potentially decipher between what is a true expert versus what might just be an Instagram expert when it comes to some of this stuff? Or is there a way that you can kind of pinpoint?
Yeah, you know, I appreciate you saying that. It is something I think about and wrestle with a lot, you know, and obviously it comes down to followers and abs. If those are the things that you have, this is why the three of us are all experts, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you know, I think first and foremost for people, I think you can recognize that if you're seeing people attack other people on the internet, that should be a red flag. If you're seeing people engage in conversations where they're attacking a system or attacking a model, it's because they don't have a model or a system. And this is the easiest way to get people's attention. So I think one way that you can say is as soon as someone is, you know, crapping on someone else, pointing at someone else, being negative on the internet, instead of pointing positive and talking about your methods, your models. And it's not that you can't engage in conversation or discussion. Hey, tell me more about that, or be curious. When you see that lack of curiosity, I think that should be a red flag for people. And I think that's one of the ways we can really clean up the internet. If you're seeing people just trash other people, then you're just like, oh, well, you're obviously an expert, because that's not what experts do. It's not what pros do. It's not what the best in the world do. And the follow along to that is, do you see transparency? Are you actually seeing progressions? Are you seeing the people that they work with? You want to know where they came from. You need some context about that person. So it's easy to put up a whole bunch of internet videos on your blog. And that's very different than showing me that you can work with kids, you can work with Olympians, you can work with middle-aged people, people with injuries, right? You need to show me your transparency. And in physical therapy, it's a huge problem because there's not sort of a model of transparency. Everything's done behind a wall, for example, and then you can't actually see what does a session look like. The paragon for this actually was Joe DeFranco. Back in the 2000s, he put out some videos of him working with athletes, and the entire session was filmed on like a VHS. And you could see the good reps, the bad reps, the coaching, the warm-ups, the cool downs. And so what I'll say is, I watch a lot of your content, and I watch a lot of Chinese weightlifting content where I get to see how are they solving these movement problems? What are the assistance exercises? What do the bad sets look like? Like what you'll see is that everyone who is out there doing the business is hyper transparent about their process. And I think when you see that transparency, that should also be an indicator that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, that's amazing. Those few little tips there go such a long way. But what it seems like it does, it requires a lot out of the person, right? It requires a lot out of them to ask more questions. No, I mean, and this seems to be a big lack of the world today. They want an answer in a 30-second clip. They don't want to have to dive deeper and ask more questions or figure out, what's really going on there. And I think it really is a big separator in terms of someone that does actually become someone who can create change within their community, as opposed to just someone who looks amazing on, some really filtered photos.
TikTok is 15 seconds.
15 seconds. I don't even
Google now considers long format content to be 90 seconds. That's long format. Yeah. So, hey, I need you to explain some really complex Olympic sports to me in under 60 to 90 seconds. That'd be great. And how do I get there? So you're absolutely right. We're going to have to ask more of people, and that's okay. It's okay to say, come on this journey with us, become curious. As long, one of the things that I struggle with is, I'm always trying to think of how do these things relate? How does this system relate to this system? What's this cue trying to solve? What are the overlaps? So, I said it before on this podcast, Olympic lifting and gymnastics taught me more about how the body works than any other sports there are, because it's all there. You really just, there's nothing that's not there. Maybe you need some conditioning, running technique and some other things, but like it's all there. Yeah. The Chinese model, like, well, we're just going to swim. You just need to be able to handle this volume, and we'll handle this volume by handling this volume, right? So I do like your model. But one of the things I think is confusing, particularly, is the damn burst on corrective exercises on the internet, right? It used to be that we had a lot of skill transfer exercises especially in weightlifting and definitely in gymnastics. I'm trying to learn a skill, so I break out a piece of the skill that helps me to feel the skill so that I can reconstitute it into the whole skill. So even in a skill transfer exercise, you still saw a progression and a way to progress and to measure the aspect of the skill that you're training. Why do we heaving snatch balance? So that we can be more dynamically in that receiving position, et cetera, et cetera. So ultimately my snatch is better, right? One of the things that's confusing now is that, and I broke out and was like, look, I have all of the movement training skills I need. It's called regression and progression of the skill. So I'm either going to regress a primary skill or progress a primary skill. And those primary skills look like the formal tenets of gymnastics and weightlifting. I mean, they really do, like every other thing. Lately on the internet, and I can't wait to hear your conversation about this, Chad. But I've seen a lot of coaches be like, I'm giving up on weightlifting, Olympic lifting, it's just not my thing. And here's why. And I'm like, I don't really care. But I'm like, you wouldn't muscle snatch a dumbbell? Like, that's Olympic lifting. You don't believe in push pressing? That's weird. That's, you don't jump with a weight. I mean, like, isn't that a weightlifting? So what we're seeing is that people, I can't wait to hear your sort of take on that, because I think it's bonkers, because I have, 13-year-old girls who Olympic lift and do it really well and safely. Those are my own family. But one of the things that as the dam is broken on all the internet, exercise selections, and you can see this with people's models, you need to ask, can I scale this up? Does this progress? What happens if I'm doing this, and I'm not picking on this, but a slant board squat? Can I add speed and change the direction on a slant board squat? Can't. That's a dead end. So all of a sudden you're like, okay, maybe that's a less effective exercise, and I can put it into the category of rehab, tissue tolerance, bodybuilding, right? Like, Carl Pally once said, he's like, his Spanish coaches would say, just go get some work done. The Chinese are like, yeah, kip all your dumbbells and pull-ups, because we're just using it for assistance work, right? It's not like it's the thing. Like, the thing is the clean and jerk and the snatch, but this assistance work, let's get some work done. But what we see then is that people get caught into the functional fitness trap or the functional movement trap, where they're doing a lot of exercise, like things that are very hard, but don't progress, and certainly fall apart under a little cardiorespiratory demand and a little speed demand. And certainly when you start adding real loads, the whole system sort of ends up being a dead end, which doesn't mean it doesn't have value. But for me, it's a cul-de-sac where then I'm going to have to say, okay, let's come back and rework the progressions, right? If someone's missing hip flexion and doesn't have a bunch of ankle range of motion, a slant board squat is a really great tool to get people squatting upright, but it's low skill, high physiology. It's like getting on an assault bike, pretending that's going to make you a skilled loader, a skilled runner, a skilled mover, even though you have this gigantic assault bike engine. So one of the ways, again, we could add in, expertise is, don't poop on other people. Second is, are you transparent? And third, are your methods and models transferable? Do they scale up? Because I can take your thinking and be like, oh, this is a 7-year-old girl, and I'm teaching her gymnastics and weightlifting first time, and I can see the stepwise progression all the way to the Olympics. And so for me, I'm like, okay, that is a valuable and more robust way of training people, because I can still progress the skills. And the thing I do on day one is still the basis for the thing I'm doing when I'm a level 10 gymnast or a Hall of Fame Olympic lifter, right?
That's right. That's right. But I love that you brought up specifically slant board squatting, because it's the big thing now. And I see that. And I really love that it's, getting some traction, because it's making it more okay to let your knee go beyond your toe and that kind of thing.
Oh,
And people are getting some work there and making it more okay. But slant board squatting to an extent is what I've been doing with athletes since I first started. I saw that someone didn't have ankle range of motion. They weren't able to squat deep. Well, let's elevate your heels a little bit to create some awareness, but it's as a, like you said, as an assistant exercise and something that we can progress from, not something that we're going to do and only do all the time. I'm not going to, leave you with all elevated heel squats. And I think a lot of times athletes and coaches maybe misunderstand that a little bit. And I learned that the hard way, because I would teach that to someone and even give them a progression and say, hey, the goal is to progress down away from this. And, maybe you still use it on a regular basis, but because I still do it on the regular, or every day that I warm up, I do elevated heel squats. I just progress down and I do a purposeful combination. But I would see athletes in the gym and even coaches teaching athletes in the gym to do Karen with their heels elevated. And I'm like, no, we don't want to do that. That's not what I'm trying to get across to you. We need to use this as a tool. But on the other side of that, what are your thoughts on, and again, we don't have to, dog on the guy, of course, but on the guy that is putting out all the information about only 90-degree squats, what are your thoughts there? Do you see benefit in athletes only ever squatting to 90 degrees, or any validity in what is going into that message?
So again, what I appreciate about Joel is, and we're talking about Joel Seedman, is his athletes don't compensate at all. You don't see wobbly knees. Mm-hmm. You don't see collapsed arches. You don't see lots of back crazy motion. I see lots of end range isometrics. I see lots of tempo and control work. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, oh, I think I understand what's going on. And I can even understand how he's coming to understand what he's coming to understand. When he saw people go far below 90, what did we see? Feet turn out, mm-hmm. arches collapse. Those are very less athletic positions, and certainly dead end positions, right? Where I'm like, well, you can turn your feet out and get all the way down underneath the bar and slam your knees together, but that's going to be a really difficult position to jump in. That's going to be a mm-hmm. difficult position to cut in. Mm-hmm. So what I think has happened there, and again, it's okay to have a style of training. And then what we can say is, well, what are we testing it in? So do all this 90-degree training, great. And now when I put you into this Olympic lifting competition, how's that go? Mm-hmm. When I put you into the sport, how's it go? So one of the things that I think gets lost in this greater conversation about all this is, what are we trying to do, right? And, for me, I think CrossFit muddied the waters a little bit because it was so recursive. I CrossFit so I can be good at CrossFit, so I can be better at CrossFit, and I can keep CrossFitting. Like, I do pull-ups, so I do more pull-ups. I got more pull-ups. And I'm like, pull-ups are kind of a weird sport. I don't know if you know that, right? The muscle up, famously, as everyone has said, is the way that you get up on the rings. It's not actually ring work, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of what I want to always make sure that we're keeping in mind is, how are you testing the validity of your ideas? Because anyone's system works in the system itself. I'm looking at transferability of all of the things that I'm doing. So if we take someone like Cal Dietz, who I think is such a great thinker, University of Minnesota, incredible coach, is triphasic training. He looks at the gym as saying, well, what is the biggest stimulus in the time I have here with these athletes? What's the most bang for the buck? And then that ends up being a lot of his decision-making, so that his athletes can go and play sports. I think one of the problems with fitness culture is that it's difficult for us to test our validity because we're not playing other sports. So for example, and I think I've mentioned this before, I think one of the reasons CrossFit hasn't been fully adopted by athletics, and when I mean sport athletics, is that you can't do some of these training sessions and actually have enough energy to go play your sport. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if I do Murph and then and that's a good example and a bad example. And then I'm like, all right, gymnastics session. Dude, you don't have the energy, or like you're smoked from that. Like you're not gonna be fast. So as a standalone, I think we've taken GPP and morphed GPP into a sport. The sport of fitness is cool, and it's taught us a lot. I love the athletes there. I've learned more from the sport of fitness and CrossFit than probably any other sport, because it allows us to touch so many things. But I'm like, well, how well does this training help with your skiing? how well does it help with soccer? How well does it help with volleyball? And if you're cooked and can't do your sport, then I need to say, okay, well, what pieces am I going to pare back from this? So I think, again, it helps for us to say, well, what's our goal? During sport seasons, that's sport-specific training. And the only goal during sport-specific training is to help the athlete win her sport during the season, right? So, if you're in the middle of a gymnastics season, what does good strength and conditioning looks like? It looks like, I want to keep you durable. I want to keep those tissues hydrated and pumped full of blood. I want to remind you of skills that may be decaying because of the specialization that you're undergoing, right? But at the end of your season, when you've peaked at your season, you should be your worst athletic self, right? You're weakest, you have positions that have just gone out the door, and then you cycle back into sports preparation training, which is okay. Now we can take some of the training needs off, we can spend more time in the gym, we can play, we can develop other capacities. So between those two things, for me, that's the heart of what's most important about sport. And what you can see there is, okay, now take P90X or Orange Theory or Soul Cycle or Barry's Boot Camp or any of those things at 45 and ask you, how sports preparation training is that? Well, if you turn your feet out and you're practicing skills that don't transfer, actually compete with what we're teaching for sport, that's going to be a problem, right? Then you're actually making athletes have positions and problems because of the pattern interference, harder to learn skills. Then, suddenly sports preparation and GPP sort of are mirrors of each other, right? We're down the list, but GPP could be turned into sports preparation if we care about volume, if we care about positions and mechanics more. It's not really the thing we're interested in. Can you get your chin over the bar? That's important. More important is really what's going on with the shoulder and the rest of the body as you perform this movement, right? We're putting the skill in, and something we've talked about before is people do all of this technical skill work in Olympic lifting and gymnastics, and then they go do conditioning and it all goes out the door, right? Whoever does the most junk work the fastest theoretically is the fittest. And I think that has confused us a little bit. Well, look at how many reps I did. And I'm like, well, how does that rep transfer scale, et cetera, et cetera? And then on the other side, of course, we just have entertainment as fitness at the other scale, which is totally okay. It is fun to go dancing in Zumba. It is okay to jump into Peloton class. It is okay to do that, but let's not pretend that those things get us across the finish line towards elite movement quality and elite durability.
Sure. So there's two things that I want to touch on. One is just commenting on what you've been talking about with regards to skill development, progressions. Does this transfer to something later down the road? And it's basically how we teach everything. It's in the gymnastics side, what we really try hard to do is say, we're always training towards the highest level version of any movement that we're working on.
Amen.
So the intention behind a progression that I'm giving is not to allow a CrossFitter or a functional fitness athlete to become really good at that particular movement for that workout. What we're trying to do is give them the tools to be able to understand how that develops into the next skill, into the next one, so that they have a wider understanding of really what that base level movement is working towards. So I think that falls in line exactly what we're talking about. Example, how do we set up for a proper push-up, and that push-up lead to a pike push-up, lead to an elevated, lead to a proper handstand push-up, lead to a freestanding, lead to a deficit, lead to a ring handstand push-up. How do these skills develop over time so that the foundation will allow us to actually work towards that trajectory? And I think another thing that's important to note is that the end goal doesn't really matter. Like, I don't really care if that person reaches that completely ridiculous end goal. It's the trajectory and the pattern that matters. It's making sure that they understand that stepping stone 1 will lead to stepping stone 2 and so forth and so on. So I think it falls in line exactly with what you're saying. We teach the same thing in terms of progressions really mattering. And you're talking about regressions as well, which is critical about understanding when you hit a wall. But basically, and that actually falls in line a lot with what happened to Simone Biles this summer with the Olympics, understanding regressions when it comes to not being able to do what you normally would be able to. But really understanding that the pattern matters, that path matters more than understanding, did I get to that end goal or not?
Well, do you win fitness? Do you win? Are you ever so skilled that you're like, I have arrived? Never. Are you,
right.
Working, Aaron Cafaro is a good friend of ours. and a good family friend. And she had her all-time fastest 6K when she was, she's two-time Olympic medalist, as you guys know. Now, everyone who's ever been on a rowing machine, think about what your 500-meter split is, right? And then think, hey, can I hold a 145 split for 6K, right? And then that's not the question, because Erin, her last 6K test was 144. So that was her average split for 6 kilometers. And what I want you to ask yourself is that good? Because she got off and she's like, man, I am not fit. I think I got more. Chad, have you ever been like, I am so strong, I'm done. I have one strength. There's not another kilo plate I can put on this. There's not another half twist I can put in this. No, it's infinite. Right. And our capacities to get there are going to change and modify based on our life and our work and our nutrition and our sleep and how durable we are and our genetics and our coaching. But you really hammer the point, which is so important, that the process and pattern, then I go into the world and I am functional, it transfers. We used to say the person who picks up the new skill the fastest is the best athlete, right? And I love that. And, Carl and I would have a lot of conversations about that, because what we're always really interested in is, well, it's really cool that you can do this stuff in the gym, but how does it transfer? If it doesn't transfer your stand-up paddling or your 5K, then maybe it's less effective. So it's really important that we set up some goals, and then we actually say, well, we're training for something. And I think in the early part of CrossFit, or even the early part of this explosion of fitness, 15 years ago really is when it really hit big, is no one was very fit, no one was very skilled, no one was very strong. You know what I mean? And so we got these newbie gains so fast that applied to the sports. But all of a sudden, what's the difference between doing 40 pull-ups and 30 pull-ups? Seriously, how does that impact your fitness as an athlete? It doesn't, And so, if I can look, I have an artificial knee now. I can power clean 100 kilos all day long. As a 48-year-old man who can deadlift, I pulled 575. I was like, check, that's good enough. I can power clean 100 kilos with good position and mechanics. What does 255 get me? 275, 315, nothing. It gets me nothing as a huge fat bald guy anymore. So I'm like, okay, I need to challenge this skill now a different way by doing more volume or more cardio, or right. And I'm really interested in, does it make me a better skier? Does it make me a better cyclist? And that really always gives the framework back to how well is my strength and conditioning going? Because then we suddenly add bodybuilding in and aesthetics, and I can't even tell what's what anymore, and I'm pretty good at this.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Chad. There was one other thing I wanted to touch on that Kelly kind of glossed over with regards to kind of training cycles and peaking at the right time and using your downtime off season for a particular way to be able to tackle these different movements and be able to incorporate some things that might be beneficial for overall development. Now, the question, just maybe it's a little specific to gymnastics, but I hope not. But in the gymnastics world, we don't really have an off season. And I'm curious from your perspective how this might work. You talk a lot about the PT coach and how the PT coach needs to be a little bit more aware of kind of taking some of these methodologies and putting it into training plans, strength conditioning, into a programming for a particular athlete. But if you look at, say, an NCAA athlete, an NCAA gymnast, NCAA season starts right around January. It runs through April. As soon as April is over, we have the start of our national training. Nationals really starts May, June. Then we have our World Championships, which is in October, and competition starts back in December again. And there's not really a downtime of more than a couple of weeks. It isn't like NFL where you have, now 17-week season plus playoffs where it caps done in February and you have, months before training camp starts again. What does that look like? How much time does an athlete sufficiently need to be able to take advantage of an off-peak season, or really a period where they can actually work on other skill development and give their body sufficient rest? Is that something that's detrimental to the athlete in the long term that you see? Are these athletes just young enough to be able to recover fast enough? Or do you see that as something as a long-term detrimental effect to their ability to reach peak levels?
That is such an excellent question, and really one that every parent is grappling with today. My kids play water polo, and my daughter, Georgia, has been in the longest water polo season ever because they shifted. She did water polo all, fall last year. No, with the club, no high school. Then it starts, and then she goes into Junior Olympics, and now back into season. And I'm going to give her 2 months off at least of no water polo, right? Where she actually has a chance to integrate skills. Pavel used to call this the reminiscence effect. You show back up and you're like, wow, that skill is super easy. You've been able to, incorporate it into your sort of mind, but your conditioning sucks. What happens is, if I asked you as a professional soccer player, because again, gymnastics can mess it up a little bit, Olympic lifting messes thinking up. But what I say to you, I don't want you to ever touch a soccer ball or go play pickup with your friends. No, I would keep your skills sharp. What we can do is start to modulate the volume a little bit. Hey, we're going to pull back on some formal time and complexity and work on skills and progressions. And we're going to expand some of the things that are to cost. So an easy way to think about this is what my friend Ben Ashworth, he was a premier physio in Premier League football, and he calls it session cost. So it's an easy way of sort of saying, what's the total cost of strain to the athlete for the thing we just did? So if I do a hard, brutal, strength and conditioning session and the session cost is really high, I come over here and there's not a lot left on my sport. So we can basically start to modulate some of those things. So, as soon as I give my kids a break, and what Georgia's going to do is immediately start Olympic lifting. This is not rest. There's no way you can rest and be competent today, but we can start to focus on other things. We can pull back on some volume. She doesn't need to swim. She's been swimming nonstop for a year. So let's go ahead and focus on some of these other things. And what I'm starting to see is she starts to overextend a little bit on her shot. She's throwing pies a little bit. Why? Because she's not as competent at keeping her rib cage down. And she has the hardest shot in the league. My junior throws the ball into the goal the hardest of anyone else in the league. But I'm starting to see, because I'm a coach, I'm like, oh, look at that. That shape is starting to decay. It's not as sharp, right? Because we're not push pressing, because we're not muscle snatching. I can see that her coordination, we're not overhead squatting regularly. So what you can do in those situations, one is always say, hey, look, we don't have to. And again, I think the gym has ruined us a little bit, because we're like, if I don't leave the gym smashed, I haven't got a good session, right? And what we want is appreciate that all our athletes at that level have a really high work tolerance. Their training age is pretty legit. Floyd Landis, cyclist, said, what about overtraining? Someone asked him, he's like, well, if you overtrained, you didn't train hard enough to be able to train that hard. And he's like, so see rule number one, whoever trains the hardest wins, right? Whoever works the hardest. Even PEDs, if you put performance enhancing drugs in that conversation, they just allow you to train harder and reduce your session costs so that you can do more work than everyone else. I mean, that's the secret, right? You don't take a pill and then all of a sudden, snatch 300 pounds. It just doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing in that situation then is saying, well, hey, maybe we've gone from 3 or 4 days a week where we're doing small sessions, where we're working on explosion, we're working on speed, we're working on, or isometrics. We're doing some slow sort of tempo or pause work to reconnect the athlete with her body, right? Suddenly we can start to open up that gate a little bit more and say, hey, let's develop some of these other capacities. But athletes still can be, I mean, have you ever met a gymnast who doesn't spend a whole bunch of time walking on their hands? Anyone? Because they know that is such a crucial skill they touch. So, I've talked to 1,000 athletes who said things like, well, my coach doesn't want me to swim the day before meet, but I feel like I need to swim. And I'm like, your coach didn't say that. What your coach said was, don't do a bunch of crazy volume that impact 2 days before, which impacts your training. Your coach didn't say, jump in the pool, get a touch. If you're the day before an Olympic lifting event and you don't touch a barbell, you're probably going to suck the next day, right? I mean, No one said don't touch the barbell because you may not be strong enough. What they said is don't spend 5 hours touching the barbell before, right? So when we kind of, again, put everything through this filter of, okay, what are my peaks for the year? I can't be good year round. I can't be at peak year round because that's a recipe for burnout. That's a recipe for falling out of your sport for lack of love and potential injury. But what we can say is, okay, for this, we're going to peak 3 times a year. And then what we can start to do is modulate that volume up and down, right? And I think what ends up happening is when we start to look at strength and conditioning as skill-based, not as physiologic-based, then, like bigger muscles, stronger muscles, bigger lungs, then all of a sudden we're like, well, can we ever do too many skill sessions? Well, as soon as my athletes are starting to lose their technique. So here's an example. In season for my daughters, I program a lot of open programming. Here's what I want to do in the session for the stimulus that I'm after. Because remember, I'm a coach too, and you're going to have to feel this out. This is what being a professional coach means. But when I see their quality drop off, their technique drop off, I see the accumulation of errors, I'm like, okay, we're done today. This is what you can handle. And sometimes that's a lot because the frying pan's hot, thanks Mike Bergner. And sometimes it's not a lot because the session costs of the training have been so high. So again, what are we trying to do? And you said it the best. When I'm teaching a movement, I'm all about the pattern and what's going on with the body. The outcome is really inconsequential, right? Standing on my head, putting a barbell over my head, hanging from a pull-up bar. Those are all the same shoulder organization. One of them is contracting, one of them is closed chain, one of them is own chain, one of them is distracting, but the position and the principles remain constant in there. So what we're looking for is continued movement fluency, but also some entertainment, some novel sort of corollary, exercises. And I think, people like Westside, we could take something from the powerlifting books. They called it conjugate training, where we had a similar stimulus with a slightly different variation of the tool, variation of skill. That's what the gym is. The gym is the only safe place on the planet.
This episode is supported by the Power Monkey Retreat.
Power Monkey Retreat, Dave, there in Greece, seeing everything in action online. Very jealous I wasn't there. Tell me a little bit more of how that was for you and what it was about.
What an amazing event. So we held our first one last year. We're doing the next one at the end of June 22nd through the 25th of 2022. It's in Crete, Greece, at this beautiful location. We have villas. We have a beautiful rig in the middle of our space, 20 feet away from this beautiful beachfront property. It's out of this world. We bring in some of our Power Monkey coaches, some doctors, some of our XFit lab team to be able to run tests and do private training sessions, massages. It's an all-inclusive fitness vacation. If you're not into fitness, it's still a great place to come and hang out with us. It really was one of the best trips I've ever taken. I can't say it's the best because my wife wasn't there, and I know she's going to kill me for saying it was my favorite vacation without her, but it was even a vacation for us. All the coaches even found it to be a vacation and work at the same time. And I don't think you find that too often.
Such a beautiful place and such an experience that I hope that anyone that's capable can get out there and take part in it. You guys did an incredible job, I know, and I look forward to hearing more about the next.
Absolutely. So again, end of June this year, we are actually right on the cusp of being sold out. If you're interested, go to powermonkeyfitness.com under the events tab. You'll be able to find more information about what we're hosting this upcoming summer in Greece. And we're actually looking to expand to new locations. So if this one goes well, you'll be able to do the same type of fun fitness vacation with us other places around the world. Check it out at powermonkeyfitness.com.
Yeah, we're talking about basically, these different sports and making the athlete the best that they can possibly be, right, for their specific sport. And I have to go, I have to go back to the 90-degree squat example because I'm curious with something that you talked about, and I want to dig into this a little bit further. If we think about, just take a football player, for example, a football player being as fast and explosive as they can be, as the best football player that they can be, and that's going to require them being the best athlete that they can be. Now, of course, I'm very biased to the Olympic lifts, and let me just, preface this with why I'm so biased for the Olympic lifts. And I know some of it's obvious, but one of the things that happened for me is that when I graduated high school, shortly before I graduated high school, I did a vertical jump test just for the heck of it, just because that was happening for the juniors and sophomores that I was training with, and it was 24 inches. Right after I graduated, I hit the door running and did nothing but Olympic lifting. I mean, ever since then, but for the next year, I did nothing but snatch and clean and jerk, progressively heavier and heavier. I built into the ability, like you said, Kelly, to train, 6 to 9 weeks. I didn't just jump into that, but I built into that capacity, and it was snatch and clean and jerk heavy, squat heavy, deadlift heavy, press heavy. with no other athletic movement. One day I'd jump up and touch the ceiling in my gym, and I was curious as to how high it was, and it was 10 feet. And I did this comfortably. My reach was 7 feet. So my vertical had increased at least 12 inches in that year from doing nothing but Olympic lifts. And I never tested it again, but I will say years later, I did, I'm guessing it was around about a 65-inch vertical jump, because I know it was about an inch away from the height of, or my height, which is 66 inches. And so what I'm saying is that Olympic lifting turned me into a super athlete. I wasn't a super athlete to begin with. Now, maybe I had the capacity and the capability, but Olympic lifting brought that out of me. And so my question is, with what you're getting at, and with what I think you were getting at, is if someone is going to use something like the Olympic lifts and do full depth squatting over and over again, but their feet are really wide and really turned out, and they're constantly compensating, were you saying that they're better off doing a 90-degree squat and these exercises and these things like Joel is suggesting, without learning the Olympic lifts, without doing the Olympic lifts?
It's such a good question. First of all, think about what really is Olympic lifting. It's where is straight up and down? Do you know how to jump straight up and down? That's a really useful skill. The brain is organized around gravity. I suspect that's one of the potent features. Also, the rapid generation of force from a dead start is also usually pretty useful as an athlete. So keep in mind with one of the things that we can look at around 90-degree squats is, am I training a joint through its biggest available range? And hear me out, Olympic lifters. Olympic lifting is not the fullest available range. There's a ton more that you're in. There's a reason that Olympic lifters bench press, because the shoulder isn't coming to extension. There's a reason why we try to do more elevated rear foot squats and those things, because we need to have the hip and extension more. So you can look at a program and you see, oh, okay, I see people understand the deficits and are really starting to try to train these things. Mm-hmm. What is interesting, again, is I think you need to look at potentially the people coming through Joel's program. And again, I don't know Joel. I watch everything he puts up. I think there's so many good ideas. I love how people aren't compensating, but I don't see a lot of speed in it, right? And what I see is that when people add speed component, which is the reality of not figure competition, but athletics conditioning, athletic skill set, you add speed in there and people tend to fall apart if they're not exposed to that speed. Right. And that speed component, it's interesting that, for example, CrossFit really put a priority on speed. Great, you can press over your head, but I really need you to be able to push press and add speed to your movements. Kipping example. Second is, cardiorespiratory demand. I see a lot of people fall apart. So let me see you sprint and then do your 90s and do your 90s at speed. And all of a sudden I'll say, okay, I think maybe this is an incomplete training stimulus for athletes going back. Also look at the people he's working with. They're mutants who are really explosive. And sometimes when you put anything on a mutant, it doesn't matter. You're like, here's a bike and a blue exercise band. And, oh, you set an Olympic record. That's so weird because you're a mutant. So one of the things that I think is important is that are you exposing the joint to full range? So if your 90-degree squat is the way you train, then it should be no problem for you to get stapled under a full clean or front squat heavy. Those things are going to transfer, right? Because that 90 is just a choice. It's not a dead end destination. But what I suspect is happening is that we see typically a lot of people have 90 degrees of hip flexion, not 120 to 130 degrees of hip flexion. They don't have any dorsiflexion. So what's going on there? One of the things that we're getting with this slantboard squat is we're also getting an upright torso, which transfers to sport better, not in this upright sport, not in this slantboard squat, but the slantboard squat allows for separation between torso and knee. So people don't have to be slamming their knee to their chest like a low bar back squat because the knee can't come forward in that position. So the ankle, a lot of people's lack of ankle range of motion, it precludes the possibility of knee translating forward. They have to make up for that in the hip. they don't have enough hip range of motion, so they do this really weird bent over squat. So the question is, well, how are we going to regress and progress those patterns? So for your answer, what I would say is, well, if I was doing 90-degree squats, because that's my program, how much time are you spending with your hip below your knee at ass to ankle? Are you doing SOTS presses from the bottom? Can you do your warm up? Are you doing heavy step ups below 90? There's so many ways where I can be challenging a greater range of motion and then use that as my big physiology, because I don't want my athletes to compensate. But the real test is what happens under speed. And if you had to drop down, you're doing your 90-degree squat and I suddenly added 300 pounds to the bar, and it stapled you, what would that look like? Would you just bail out? Would you be able to receive that? Would you have range to that? Because the last time I checked, we do need to be able to absorb force all the way to the ground. There's a reason that the Russians would have you jump off a ladder, you go toe to heel and fall backwards, right? Those basic tumbling drills. So if I'm doing 90 degrees, but I can still do a rolling pistol, a rolling kind of candlestick movement, a forward somersault to standing, maybe that's not the limiting factor. But if you're only exposing yourself to small ranges, I guarantee you, we've run this experiment before, it's called powerlifting. And what we see is people end up with incomplete movement patterns, and more importantly, don't transfer under the conditions we already set out: speed, cardiorespiratory demand, greater range of motion. So I would say, hey, if we love back squatting, but you start to get below hip crease below the knee and your feet are turning out, your knees are collapsed, let's get you some Olympic lifting shoes. Let's limit your range to the ranges you control. Then let's go ahead and continue to look at the training, not just as a physiology adaptation, but also as a positional competency restoration practice. And so it's easy when we have a mobility guy, a gymnast, an Olympic lifter on. Like, we're all like, why can't you get in these positions, people?
That's
your mobility privilege, guys.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So you're saying, just to make sure I understand, you're saying as an athlete from any sport, we should or need to have the ability to absorb to a full depth position. I mean, when you say that, or when you said that, and I know you've talked about skateboarders before. I think you posted a video of a skateboarder before where they're landing a trick and they came from such a height where they had to drop into a complete in range position for them. Their body could not physically go any lower. I think of when I was a kid, I would, and I don't even know why I did this, but I think it kind of helped me in weightlifting. I used to jump off the house all the time. And when I landed, I had to cushion all the way down to an in-range position. Another example is if you're an athlete who is training box jumps and you're trying to jump as high as you can, well, you're not going to jump as high as you can or up onto as high of a box if you're not landing in a full depth position. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that any athlete needs to have that ability. And if you're compensating in those in-range positions, you don't necessarily have to do full depth squats yet or full cleans and full snatches, but there are other ways that we can work on that.
I think that's a fair and reasonable thing to say. And, again, I think what we want to look at is, does this person spend time with these end ranges? There's a reason that the Russians put the kettlebell pistol in there, because they were forcing end range, ankle range of motion, end range hip flexion with a pistol. That was their way of saying, and not wide stance squat. They were like, you're going to have the knee together. And there's a reason why we love these kind of foot together drill squat things. I mean, you teach kids to jump and land with feet together. What I would say is, if I make these statements around absolutes about range of motion or a position, how does that scale? So we was like, oh, turn the feet out. Okay, great. So if I'm working with an 8-year-old child, if she thinks she's going to jump straight or high, she can keep her feet straight. But as soon as she's going to go lower, she needs to turn her feet out. So what if she doesn't know? So you see is that there's these logic fallacies that come in. And then I'm like, well, how do you teach kids to jump and land? Well, we teach them with their feet together because their feet are straight and they don't get injured. How do we teach people to jump out of airplanes with their feet together, knees together? So, so what we see is that we end up doing a lot of movement constraint to put the body into a better position. It is interesting that we're arguing in CrossFit, we've been saying, what's a full range squat? Hip crease below the knee. what's the difference between hip crease below the knee and 90 degrees? 5 degrees?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like,
right.
I'm like, at some point, I'm like, that conversation is almost specious. What we're advocating for is, are you training in your available range? And I love what Greg Cook used to say. He's like, hey, practice your squat, practice the squat, train the deadlift, right? And what he's saying is, is a full depth squat appropriate for everyone based on the range of motion? Probably not. At load, speed, et cetera, if we're seeing lots of compensated positions. But let me introduce you to the slant board again. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to squat ourselves all the way down to make sure we're touching that range. Then we're going to work on pistols or heavy step ups onto a box, et cetera, et cetera. So really, I think what's interesting about this conversation is, I think that you guys both believe that if you only did 90 degrees, your sports would suffer, because you aren't training in positions where you have to be in full hip flexion, full ankle flexion. And you can't either do your sports without those positions. What we're saying for the average person who needs some physiologic load, maybe that 90 degrees is enough for an average person doing what? Fitnessing, trying to get under some load, not compensating because they're so stiff, right? Being able to control their positions. Again, now we're having two different conversations and we're trying to argue back and forth. What I would ask is, why can't you access this position? Because let's say that you go to 90 and fail. Again, I want you to be able to take that all the way down without a huge reversal and collapse in the system. So ultimately, there's a reason why we are talking about sports preparation and what the intention of what we're doing is. And for me, there's a reason I put a lot of kettlebell swings and a lot of push presses into the work of our athletes, because I need them to be able to hinge, but I also need them to do it fast. Like a kettlebell swing is more valuable to me than a deadlift for my young kids, right? We do a ton from the high hang because that's the same thing as a kettlebell swing, just a slightly different, finish position. But ultimately, I need you to be able to jump with your whole foot on the ground without your foot turning and collapsing, right? Because if it's heavy, or you're not going to be able to come up onto your toes all the time and jump as high as you want. So again, what is the intention? And if the intention is, man, I have a super strong athlete who needs to rebuild their squat pattern, I think that 90 works great. But what ends up happening is, what if I take that 5 more degrees, it's okay? No, I think you should be able to Olympic lift, that's the highest progression of the squat. Let's now put that 90-degree squat in the context of a way of getting us to squatting deeper.
Love it.
Is that fair?
Love it. No, that's absolutely fair. And I'm trying to restrict myself from saying anything more or digging in any deeper, because as you know, Kelly, I can talk about that specific topic for far too long. But
one of our tests is we take 100 kilos, put it on the bar, we sit ass to ankle, and we make people breathe for a minute. All you have to do is hold that isometric. By the way, that bottom position doesn't take a lot of strength. You just have to be able to screw your hips into the ground, keep your torso upright. And the second your hips can't maintain that isometric, you jump the weight and your breathing goes. So again, are you exposing yourself to full hip flexion? Yes or no? That's a problem if you're not. You can get it a lot of different ways. And the squat can just be a tool to continue to get a big stimulus. But there's a reason why we're seeing such an explosion of split stance work, because that translates maybe better to athletics, right? Because I'm running and cutting and having to push while I'm in a running lunge shape. So, there's a reason why even in West Side Barbell, they added speed days to their classic movements. So they did like squat, but now we're going to squat fast, right? We're going to bench, we're going to bench fast. So if, I think Greg Glassman said you fail at the margins of your experience. Again, tell me what it's about. If I'm Terry Crews and I want to be jacked and feel better, maybe a 90 degrees is all I can do. And that should be no different than saying, hey, I have this athlete and we're going to box squat because she's 65, doesn't have any hip range of motion, and all we can do is squat down 6 inches. So let's take the conversation and say, well, is it okay to squat higher than 90? Absolutely. This is, I can squat to, 130. I can keep it super high. I don't have to go super deep. I can keep it 45 degrees. We're still going to be squatting today. What's your best available position based on where the barbell is and what the task is. That's the only thing we should be asking. And suddenly then you're like, okay, well, that's a training style that I don't think is as useful to my population, or I don't have the skill or the time to teach it because I got 600 kids coming through my program. So I'm making different decisions about that, right?
Right. Yeah. You bring up Terry. He actually, I believe, reached out to Dr. Horschig not too long ago, by the way, and said, "Hey, can you fix my squat?" So, I'm seeing him do all these 90-degree squats, and so now I'm thinking I wish he'd reach out to me, because I would just give him your 100 kilo squat test and see how he
Just sit in
handles
the
that.
bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I guarantee you, he would probably not be able to hold it for anywhere near a minute, because he's going to be at a partial range, and his quads are going to be turned on and everything else. But let me ask you about that 100 kilo. You mentioned 100 kilo. One, where does that number come from? And if someone is not, capable of that load, how do you decide what load that they should perform this test under?
So let's remember that the body does three things. It concentrically generates force, it eccentrically absorbs force, and it isometrically pauses force, right? That's really what it does. And all we're doing at that bottom position is an isometric. It's an end range isometric. It's no different than working on the splits. It's an end range isometric by deflection. I would argue it's probably easier than the splits. There you go, Dave.
Fair enough.
What I'll say though is 100 kilos for us turned out to be a load that people were front squatting 100 a lot around us, and it was easy, right? And we were using 100 kilos as our conditioning test for we do one of our favorite workouts. We call it the tick. You put out 400 watts on a bike for a minute, and then you front squat, 100 kilos for a triple or 5, and you repeat that 10 times. It's basically a Litvinov. That's what it is. It's a Litvinov. Run 400, except he was front squatting 200 kilos for 7, and we were like, okay, that's not us. So we did this bike Litvinov, and your legs feel like ticks afterwards. And there was one Litvinov where I was in the bottom position trying to catch my breath at the bottom shape. And I was like, hey, look at this isometric in the hips. Whatever load is appropriate. For some people, a barbell is probably going to exceed their ability. And what we really saw was that they had poor stabilization strategies. They started to see that they couldn't pressurize. We were teaching athletes during this isometric how to breathe and stay stiff. And that's not what we're really good at. We're good at stiff, one breath, or pant, 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 pant. But how do you create stiffness and ventilate at the same time? Which is why I think, that athletes or coaches are mean, and they prescribe weights above 5, or numbers above 5, because you can't hold your breath the whole time, right? You see this, and gymnasts are some of the worst offenders. They go from breath hold to breath hold to breath hold to breath hold, and the vents are so short where they can get away with it, right? Versus being able to have to ventilate in those things. So again, I try that, and you can even try that on a slant board. And then, remember, the slant board isn't an end all. You should be able to modulate and get your slant board down to the position where you can no longer hold your shape. Right. That's what we should be doing is, because ultimately, if I'm slant board squatting, what I'm interested in is how well does that transfer back to what? Squatting, right? That's a skill assistance or physiology based exercise where I can get some work done and expose the tissues to this, but it's not normative range. And what's interesting about the conversations that we're having, the three of us, is that I'm advocating for you to be able to express all the things your body should do normally. Gymnastics is asking you actually to have all the things that you should be able to do normally. Like, I'm talking about normative ranges. I'm talking about the range of motion every doctor says you should have as a physical therapist. And the Olympic lifting is the same. Gymnastics can be in super normal positions, but a lot of the basics and tenets of gymnastics aren't about super normal positions. Being able to do a straddle to roll is not a huge range of motion ask, actually. It's normative abduction, right? Being able to squat with your feet together all the way to the ground is normal hip flexion or normal ankle range of motion. So what's interesting here is I'm saying, hey, let's get people back to baseline. You're saying, here's a gymnastics way to get people back to baseline. And Chad, you're saying, here's a way we can load people back to baseline. So when we see people functioning not at baseline, I want to be more curious. Why are you making those choices? Why did Mike Boyle suddenly stop working so much in the bilateral squat and getting people into this long lever or elevated rear foot squat? Well, it's because the foot was straighter. He saw less knee wobbling on the front. He get people the stimulus without having to do all of this technique. Where's his gym? Where's the transparency? Oh, he's got 600 kids coming through his gym in a day. That's tricky.
So before, I can't believe this conversation has already been an hour. It feels like it's
you can see this is all I think about. This is why I love talking to you guys. Because I literally, my wife is like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, nerding out in my own brain. Like this is all I think about. So being able to actually talk about it is like it's like a gift. You're like I'm able to talk about my feelings with my friends.
We're all just so excited about it because it's something we care about so much. But
no one else is going to care, but we love it.
Right. Well, they're just listening to us. We can talk about whatever we want. You as an athlete, we have not talked about this at all, and I think people need to appreciate that you were a very high level athlete in your own right. And I just want to touch a little bit on your experience as an athlete. You know, you talked about you being, you and your wife both being high level whitewater kayakers, and what that experience was like in terms of how it's allowed you to approach what you do today. And, you know, this goes back into a conversation. I also saw you do a post recently with Tasia about, you know, not all great athletes become good coaches, but in the cases when athletes do transition to coaching and they are good coaches, it can make a special coach. It can make someone who actually sees things a little bit differently. Just a quick sum up on what your experience was like an athlete. And do you think that has helped you in what you do today in terms of how you view things with the people you work with?
Unequivocally, being a user really can help you understand the realities and demands of being a user. All the mistakes that you made, how do you manage sleep and stress and training volume and partnerships and girlfriends and boyfriends and being critically poor. All of those things go into the thing that makes you an athlete. Also, being injured. You know, I paddled on 2 national teams. The first one was the U.S. canoe and kayak team. I paddled C2, 2-man canoe, which is slalom where they hang the gates over the river. And let me just say that I was just super average. In our discipline,
on national team.
Super average. It's possible to be the worst person on the national team. What I'll say is that the people in front of us were Olympians, were world champions. They were the best in the world. So we all knew that we're like, hey, this is teaching us. This is super fun. Paddling the World Cup, that's super cool. But by the way, we suck and we're never going away. So we better get the much out of this as we can. Secondarily, then I paddled on the U.S. whitewater team, which is about extreme class 5. It's a raft, which is a huge sport in Europe, where and in the East, where you basically take a group of people and you huck them down rivers, slalom head to head, right? And that's where I met my wife, Juliet, in Chile. So what's interesting is that, you know, we were river guides, we were kayak instructors, we paddled slalom, we did this other thing. We were really good at a lot of things, but that sport was in the dark ages. No one did any strength training. No one talked about breathing. No one talked about food choices, none of that stuff. I remember pulling an Olympic gold medalist aside and be like, why are you eating that for breakfast? Like, that's a crap breakfast. And he was like, well, what should I eat for breakfast? I'm like, well, not that. Like, you're gonna just suck today. You know what I mean? And so I did that, and I paddled myself right off the team with an overuse injury. I had a neck injury, an overuse neck injury, where I basically made one of my facet joints and nerve roots so hot, my hand went numb, couldn't turn my head. And that was the end of my professional career. Completely my fault. I had months and months and months where my body was screaming at me and I ignored it. And our old model, and you are all, both of you are of a generation that will appreciate this. Our old model used to be train as hard as you can, then you break, then we'll back off a little bit and hope we get further next time. That was honestly what we were told by coaches. And I've heard that from a lot of coaches. Both you guys are nodding your head. And I think now we're realizing maybe we broke some eggs we didn't need to break. So that was where I decided, I was like, you know, when I looked around and started asking this question, was this inevitable? You know, are injuries preventable? I'm like, well, did you sleep? Do you have full range of motion? Do you feel loved and safe? Right? Like, there's so much going on there. What I realized is that was when I decided I need to go to physio school. That was the wake up, where I was like, I can stop this by helping people identify better shapes and patterns. I paddled canoe. So I was on one side of the boat. My left hand was super high. My right hand was low. And I was there 300 days a year, sometimes twice a day. And think about the lopsidedness of that. Oh, I only jerk to the left. Okay, that makes sense. That's not going to do anything to your pelvis if you only jerk right foot forward, for, thousands of reps. So, what's interesting is that, of course, I met Juliet through that, but it really framed all of my training, because this was the dark ages. There's no internet, where, we found a book by Tudor Bompa. Donald Chu about medicine ball throws. So we just started the beginning, went to the end, did all the medicine ball exercises, and then we're so crippled for 3 days, we didn't paddle, right? There's no, how do you integrate this? What's it look like? We were just like, okay, well, we got to be stronger. So let's go to the gym and lift weights, right? Whatever the heck that meant. Didn't make us better skilled. So, I go to physio school, and then I'm like, okay, what are the root positions? Why is this language of physio so different than my experience as a professional athlete? Then I get into CrossFit, and I'm like, okay, I'm not very skilled. I'm not very fit. I'm not very strong. I don't know how to manage these things. And it really is a crash course. Remember, I'm already, a national champion. I'm already super good at I thought I was a good athlete, but turned out I could have been a much better athlete if I had had some formal movement exposure and recovery conversations. We paddled for a couple of years, and then someone was like, hey, we probably shouldn't take any hard strokes for the first 5 minutes. We're like, oh, that's a good idea. We used to just get in and go, you know what I mean? And then we finish, and then we go to the bar and drink tequila. Like, we just didn't know what it was about. Well, we only did that on Thursdays after 60. So 60-second pieces. So anyway, the point is, it really always kept the framework of, I think we make the gym so precious, but ultimately, I was was the day after World Cup race. Everyone had gone partying. It was the end of the season. And this is not going to sound very good, but just bear with me, where everyone's gone drinking. The national team coach has programmed a hard workout at 7:30 in the morning to punish everyone. Oh, it's going to be a difficult course, high water, hard moves, 7:30, like high CNS drive. And like 20 minutes, we're all like trashed and shown up, and we're the young kids. So we're like, oh, we're going to be there. And the world champions are like, oh, I'm going to go for a run. People excuse themselves, but we were the crappiest on the team. So there we were. And halfway into the workout, one of our friends paddles down, and he's on the national team. He's in his canoe, and he's not having a great day. We can tell he's hurting. And he's a little bit wobbly, and he's making some mistakes. And we're like, wow, Kevin's really suffering. And then as we paddle down, he pops his spray skirt off, and he doesn't even have his straps in his canoe. So he's just wobbling around. It's like, I did all this Olympic lifting, and my shoes were untied, and my pants were down. Like, that's what he was doing. He was doing this crazy thing. And then he's like, and I took a hit of acid like 2 hours ago. So he did this whole workout on a hit of acid, plus not being in his boat. That's how good he is. So oftentimes what I want to do and say to strength and conditioning coaches is, let's get your best athletes into the best position. Let's clear as many things off the table so that she or they or he can go compete, because there is no substitution for the mindset of an athlete who knows to show up on the platform, show up on the event, and go. That's why when Simone Biles suddenly said, I don't think I can do this, I was like, why is anyone even asking her? Like, I trust her. If the best athlete in the world in a generation is like, yeah, I don't got it, I'm like, yep, okay. How do we regress this so that you can still score, right? Putting your athletes into the position, because I think that's what's lost. Right now, one of the things that my girls are doing is they play a lot of water polo games. And there's water polo practice, but there's no substitution for my 13-year-old who plays goalie, right? Who Olympic lifts. She's 5'10". She plays goalie. She could be the chosen one, but she plays a lot. And it's not a big deal for her to like, oh, I'm just jumping into, I have a last minute game, I'm jumping in. She's so good at competing and dealing with the pressure that then we start adding in complexity, strength, speed, position, skills. Now we have someone who can go far. And I think the last thing I'll say is that the lie that we told everyone was that if you eat right and train right, you can be elite. And the gym democratized that. But people, you two are special athletes. And not everyone is ever going to be able to do that in spite of their training, in spite of whatever. And it's because your parents are divorced, or some girl told you were ugly as a kid. I don't know what the burr was underneath there that got you guys there, but not everyone is elite. What we want to do is give our best athletes a chance to do their best. Let's clear off all the crap so they feel safe and fed and nourished, then let them compete. Then the rest of us can take those lessons and have more meaningful lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this conversation. I think it's very relevant too for you as a dad who's going through it now, right? And you're taking all the tools that you learn as an athlete and are applying it. And you said you're coaching them too, right? You're not just there as a dad, you're actually working there as a coach as well. So you're seeing it all come full circle and say, don't fall into these same mistakes that I did. Let's see if we can kind of work around some of the challenges that come along with being a teenage elite athlete. And Chad and I are in following your footsteps. We're going to be there in no time. Chad, Ella, what is she? 11, 12 now? How old is she?
Yep, 12. So it's I will say though, I mean, I try to stay away from coaching her as much as possible. So you're way braver than I am. I don't know if I'll work up the nerve a little bit more as she gets a little bit older, but I've tried to say a few things here and there, and it's very similar to trying to coach my wife Jody. It doesn't go well. It just doesn't go well.
Yeah, that's tricky, right? I have made both my daughters cry a few times, and I'm like, wow, I'm the worst coach ever, right? And what I realized, for example, is that I hate creating games. I don't want to, like, kids learn best in play and games, and I'm like, hey, look at your foot pressure on your back leg, kid. They're like, I don't care, Dad. So like with Caroline just here's a, I still have time. Caroline was mountain biking with my wife. She jumped off the mountain bike doing some kind of athletic crazy thing on a hill, and she broke her ankle. She had a little avulsion fracture of the capsule on the front of her ankle. And so she goes in, she has to have surgery. They have to put a couple screws in because they're worried about it not fusing, right? And I'm like, no problem. We drop in our H-Wave, our Mark Pro technology. She's pumping, managing the congestion all night long. I up her collagen. I give her vitamin D. I make her sit in front of the vitamin D lamp. We load. We progress. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, look, you can bike on the boot. We're doing 15-second all-out intervals, right? She goes back in for her final checkup, which is like last week, and the doctor's like, whoa, why are you out of the boot? You're supposed to not be out of the boot. And I was like, Caroline, trust your brain. When your brain says put your foot down, put your foot down. When your brain says you did too much, trust that. And so she was like, I don't need the boot today. I was like, well, I believe you because you know your body, and here's the healing time. We're not gonna mess anything up. And he's like, well, can you move your foot? She's like, yeah, I'm already playing water polo. Like, what are you talking about? And my dad makes me like push press, right? Tempo push press, basically pause, push presses. So I can load the ankle. And he then was like, well, let's get an x-ray. And he's like, oh my God, I've never seen bone growth like this before. Your range of motion is so good. Like, can I take a video from my Instagram and send this? And then he's like, well, what do you want to do? And, Caroline's like, I want to get back to my Olympic lifting club. And he's like, oh, no Olympic lifting. And I was like, what does that mean to you, sir? Like heavy jerks where she's slamming her feet in, or are we talking about front squatting and kettlebell swings? Because she's been doing that for weeks. Right. So, what's nice is that my kids do benefit from being my children sometimes, right? They move well, they're powerful, but how I dose that and how I do it was easier for me to put Caroline into a local Olympic lifting club with her friends than me to make her Olympic lift in the backyard, which is not fun for her.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, Kelly, man, I could talk to you all day. This is just chatting with a buddy, and I appreciate the time, man. And I had so many other questions I want to ask you that we got to have you on a third time if you wouldn't mind coming back. Hopefully, within a year, since it was over the last time we had you on.
I'm down, and just keep in mind that I may not be your first guest or your second guest, but I don't know how many people have been on 3 times or 4 times, but I want to be that guy.
You got it, man. You got it.
Yep.
Well, we'll already get the schedule going, but I don't know if we need to do weightlifting and gymnastics again since we already have your response on that one. But I just appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. And I know the past year has been kind of getting back to normal for all of us, but hopefully we can meet in person sometime soon. And I am very honest and true about wanting to have you come out to Power Monkey Camp at some point. So I really want to make that happen.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully within 2022 we can make it happen.
100%. And just, first shout out to Chad. Hall of Fame is such a big deal. I know you're a humble guy, but I just can't tell you how proud we are of you and the kind of advocacy you have for the sport and for the athletes in the sport. And that really is just, it should be confirmation for you that you're on the right path, my friend. And always, Dave, you guys are, the programming, the content you put out, the transparency, it feels like you want everyone to win. And I really appreciate that about you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly. And as always, it's been an absolute pleasure. Like Dave said, we could talk to you all day, and I wish we could have a weekly conference with you or something. Just to, I think we'd be much better coaches and teachers, and keep us on top of everything. So we really appreciate you coming on. Where can the folks keep up with you if they're not following you already?
We are at the Ready State on Insta, on socials, and if you go to thereadystate.com, we have all the things that you'd want to see, protocols, all that stuff. We've got a new course coming out called
Nice.
Training the Injured Athlete. We're trying to help coaches create a baseline so they can better progress athletes if they come out of surgery and injury. So it's not wait 6 months and hopefully it's healed enough. So we're doing all that, and we're such fans. So let's unite the tribes more and more. Appreciate you too.
Absolutely. Yep. Beautiful. Well, to our listeners out there, be sure to check out anything and everything that Kelly has going on. You'll surely benefit. Always helping athletes and anyone in the community that's interested in healing up, being stronger, being better. So check that out. Also, guys, be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Also, check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Ollie Chad. And on behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.